Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the March general membership meeting for the Sudbury CIM chapter. My name is Colin Pegues. I'm the chair of the Sudbury chapter. Joining me on video as well is Neil Milner, our vice chair, who comprises part of the organizing committee. And I got a great talk for you tonight around something that a little further removed from what we're used to here in Sudbury. It'll be an interesting topic to hear from Jeff about. So we have the next slide, please. So we're on our 6th event of the year, all been digital so far in our new world. So tonight we'll be welcoming Jeff Donald from DeepGreen, talk about what DeepGreen's up to, as well as some interesting things that, like I said, are a little different than the deep hard rock mining we're used to in Sudbury. Yeah, and then we have a couple more events coming up for the rest of the season. We'll be finishing off our general membership meetings with our distinguished lecturer series on April 22nd. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a couple minutes. And we'll be playing the summer events by ear, especially the golf tournament. The lobster dinner likely won't happen, but we may, depending on restrictions in Sudbury, have the golf tournament this summer. So we'll stay tuned for that. And then we'll be heavy in the preparations to get the 21-22 season up and going for September. So hopefully we can start sharing some of that in the coming months. As always, real big thank you to our volunteers at the CIM chapter, the team that makes everything possible, all the events possible throughout the season, as well as the fundraising initiatives and support of local charitable organizations that the funding flows to in the STEM world of our local schools and stuff. So a big thanks to all the team, as usual, for your support and dedication year over year. So I'm excited to announce we've locked in one of the CIM's 2020 distinguished lecturers for our April meeting, which will be on the 22nd. Tentatively booked right now for 5 p.m. A little bit later than this one. And so joining us will be Monica Ospina, who's the founder and director of O-Trade. And she's going to be talking to us about social and human capital. And in particular, the topic of her abstract is the strategic investment to guarantee non-conflict and sustainable future for mining and its supply chain. And so a big focus on the topic will be the ESG in the mining industry, not only with mining companies, but those that are feeding the mining industry and where the mining industry is feeding it, ensuring that we have non-conflict, sustainable flow of material through start to finish of our entire industry. So I'm excited to have Monica with us in April, and we'll be sending out details of that event in the coming weeks, and look forward to seeing you again. Join us then. Good, and I'd like to throw it over to Neil to introduce this evening's topic and speaker. Neil.
Yeah, hi, so I'd like to welcome Jeff Donald. Jeff Donald is the head of onshore development at DeepGreen Metals. He has 25 years of experience in strategic studies, metallurgical project development and operations, mostly focusing on nickel. He attended Queen's University for his Bachelor of Science and Master's in Science in Materials and Metallurgical Engineering, and the University of Toronto for his PhD. So tonight he'll be speaking to us about the nickel situation and the critical role of polymetallic nodules. So please join me in welcoming Jeff Donald.
Okay, thanks a lot. Can you hear me okay? Excellent. I will share my screen then. Can you see that?
I saw it momentarily, Jeff, but it's a white screen now for me. There we go.
Okay. Okay, yeah, thanks for the introduction. I'm here representing DeepGreen Metals, and instead of giving you the corporate presentation and the sort of sell job that kind of comes along with that, I sort of took a presentation I've been giving to universities lately and kind of modified that a little bit. And I know that most of you in Sudbury are pretty familiar with nickel and the situation around nickel now, but so there's a little bit of content in there that I'm sure you're aware of, but perhaps there's some people who are not, and it kind of fits into my narrative here, which is that to jump to the very last slide, I guess my narrative is that there's a very significant and substantial demand for nickel coming, and some of these numbers are really a bit shocking, right? There's all kinds of numbers out there. I'm sure you've all seen them all as well. 1 million tons of nickel by 2030. I don't know if that's possible, but when you sort of dig a little bit deeper into where the supply is coming from, you'll find out that really it's China is controlling all of the growth in the nickel business. And so polymetallic nodules sort of is not only a very interesting and new source of nickel with a bit of a story behind it, but it also kind of has geopolitical implications and is very important to if you are a Western car manufacturer, for example. I'm sure you're feeling very uncomfortable with the nickel situation. So the whole electrical vehicle future sort of does rest a lot on whether the nickel can be supplied, in my view, and I'm not sure that the market fully understands this. So this is a note from our lawyers about future-looking statements and et cetera, standard. This is a slide I like to show the students, and I'll share it with you here as well. And I think that if you're I have now 25 years in the mining industry, and presumably a lot of people on the call have a lot of time in the mining industry as well. And the cycle really affects your career a lot, right? Especially if you're not sort of in operations and you sort of work in projects like I do. And so, I started my career in Hatch when nickel was, $2.50 a pound or something like that, right? And I left nickel for a few years, and I joined Inco at Sheridan Park in Mississauga on the day that it hit that very bottom there. Nickel was $1.97 a pound in September of 2001. I joined Inco on September the 12th, 2001. That was an interesting day to start your job. Then you can see that I joined on the right day, right? It was a huge bull market right up to $27 a pound, and it was such an interesting time to be part of the company at that time. There was all kinds of mergers and acquisitions, with Falconbridge and Teck and Phelps Dodge and Noranda at one time, right? And I was kind of very fortunate to be in the right place, in the right time, and involved in a lot of these things as sort of the technical support guy for a lot of that. And yeah, it was great. And then of course Vale took over whenever it was, 2006 or something like that. During that big run up in prices, and it was just insane, right? It was at first I remember the company mantra, where it was grow, 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 right? You couldn't spend their money fast enough at one point in time, and of course, so you sort of reached the peak there, and then as it started coming down, I got tapped on the shoulder and told that if you want to go anywhere, you're going to have to sort of get some operating experience. And I chose to sort of combine that with some international experience as well, and went to work at PT Valley, Indonesia, at first in Sirocco at the operating site for a few years. And then, again, like up here, When I joined, I think there was about 150 expatriates and their families on site in Sirocco. And when I left, somewhere in here, you know, there was no school for my kid to go to, right? So this again gets back to my sort of narrative of how the cycle can really not only affect your career, but your life as well. I went to Jakarta for a few years. You guys probably remember 2010, 11, 12, kind of weird times in the business. But and then when I returned briefly, and I guess couldn't find a place for myself within Vale, so I went to SNC-Lavalin very briefly, and then I found these DeepGreen guys. I've been working on this project since 2015. I love the project. I love the team, and let's get into her. I better get going because I got about an hour of slides, and I wanted to do it in 45 minutes. So again, something I sort of show the students, right? You know, nickel was discovered a long time ago. It's the devil's copper because it's so difficult to separate from copper. I love this nickel with the, I think that's supposed to represent the Sudbury, the Copper Cliff smelter on that, Canadian nickel. My dad's got a few of those, kind of cool. And coins used to be actually made of pure nickel, right? In the up until 1960, I think, or something like that. Now they're kind of mostly zinc. You know, how is nickel used, right? You know, stainless steel is a big thing, alloys, you know, plating, and then, you know, I think it's circa a few years ago, right? Batteries were a very small portion, and they still are today, actually, right? I think it's 4% today, right? Batteries are 4% of nickel production today, and they get like, what, 80, 90% of the airtime, right? But, you know, nickel is so important to society, right? And I think this sort of graph shows it here. You know, like, yeah, it's discovered, you know, the production sort of plods along, and then discovery of stainless steel in 1924, and it really starts to sort of take off, right? So this is kind of pre-war production here, probably struggling to maintain the production with the lack of labor here. And then this is where it really takes off, is in the post-World War II consumerism. And that was stainless steel sinks and stuff like that, right? Like filling your house with stainless steel and recognizing, you know, the great applications of it in dentistry and medical and things like that. Like, can you imagine going to the dentist without stainless steel and those alloys? And then it kind of dips off here, and I had to sort of research this, right? Why was this kind of fall in nickel from the late 70s and the early 80s? Of course, there was a terrible recession in the early 80s, but the reason it drops off like this was the end of the Vietnam War. There's tremendous amount of nickel used in the Vietnam War, and then we sort of get the rise of China, right? So you can see this historical things that have happened right on this kind of nickel chart. I sort of find that interesting. So this is a sort of illustrates the sort of scale of the business, right? The scale of what these kind of commodities are worth, right? Oil is just such an elephant, right? Oil is so huge. Energy industry is so huge. And then you're into kind of the second tier, which is gold, iron ore, aluminum, copper. You know, nickel's kind of in that third tier, you know, 21 billion a year. It's kind of a bit small, frankly, in the commodity space. All right, so the big new thing is the electric vehicles, and this Mary Barra is the CEO of General Motors, and I think she said this about 5 years ago. This slide's pretty old now. Been giving this presentation on and off for about 5 years. So I believe the auto industry will change more in the next 5-10 years than the past 50 years. So, you know, tremendous change coming to the automotive industry through this EVs and transition to them. You know, so these are the sorts of projections. You know, when I started to give this presentation 5 years ago, you know, EVs was kind, you know, everyone kind of knew about it, but I don't think that, you know, it's just kind of, the narrative was just kind of starting on how big this would be and how fast it would come, right? Now everybody's pretty familiar with this, but just huge growth. You know, Volkswagen had a big presentation yesterday where they're going all in on this EV thing. And I think most of the car companies are. you know, I see just on my street, I see more and more every day, right? Just, you know, this kind of shows the, and the other thing I think to think about the EV thing is, you know, when you live in the suburbs of Toronto, like I do, or in Sudbury, maybe, you know, maybe it seems a little bit, you know, implausible. But if you live downtown in a big city, or you live in Europe where gas is $3 or $4 a liter, and you're living in a city in Europe, you know, it just makes a lot more sense, right? China is the other growth area. China and Europe will be first. US and Canada will lag after that. So it's already kind of happening, right? You can sort of see this curve is starting to steepen. You know, in terms of nickel in the batteries, in 2015, there's going to be, you know, a third nickel. In 2018, it was going to be 60% nickel, and now they're going to this 811. It's 80% nickel in the cathodes. So in a typical car, you know, you're looking at 50 kilograms of nickel. And remember, the EVs are kind of starting with relatively small cars. Once they move on to the SUVs, you know, where you'll be able to get bigger range and stuff like that, there could be a lot more nickel in these cars. So, you know, demand in 2019 versus 2035, you know, in 2019, it's all about stainless steel and a few other applications. And in 2035, batteries start to represent about a third of the nickel production. And you remember, the other stuff doesn't stop growing. The stainless steel and the alloys and the plating continue to grow at a lesser pace, but those markets are still growing. So the amount of nickel, you know, so it's been, you know, in the last 100 years, you know, we've developed capacity for 2.5 million tons, right? In the next 15 years, we're going to need to double that. So it's just like I say, I'm a little concerned about where the nickel's going to come from. You know, there's a bunch of this stuff out there, right? This is the DeepGreen slide, just showing the battery demand. So this is in gigawatt hours. These numbers don't mean much to me, but you can sort of see, you know, if you follow this gigaplant thing, there's a gigaplant announced every day. Tesla is going to build, you know, so many gigawatt hours. Like I say, Volkswagen just announced yesterday that they were getting into this gigawatt business, right? And then you see here, now this is in terms of class 1, so the volumes aren't quite comparable, but you can see, you know, no matter what graph you look at, the demand outweighs the supply in the nickel, and also the copper, and also the cobalt, right? This is another way to look at it, right? So you see the battery demand coming up here, growing from almost nothing to very significant, and this is the present supply. All right, just same thing again. So what is the supply response? And so, you know, I pulled this presentation from this Conic Metals. This sort of shows how much these nickel plants cost. And, you know, it represents a big challenge, right? Because if you Goro, of course, you know, maybe Ambatavi is a better example, right? Ambatavi was greater than $6 billion. I think it was probably around $7 billion, right? Even, you know, the nickel price is being projected by companies like Wood Mackenzie and CRU to be, you know, $6.50 or something like that, right? So if you take the production of the nameplate production of Ambatavi, which was never achieved at 60 kilotons, and you apply this $6.50 to it, you'll get your money back in 20 years, assuming zero operating cost, right? There's no way anybody can make this work economically. Now, these cheap ones here, these produce an intermediate. Taganito produces a mixed sulfide product similar to a matte. Ramu produces a mixed hydroxide product. Ravensthorpe which also was not a great success, produced a mixed hydroxide product. So then you have to build a refinery on top of that, right? So these columns here quickly move up here when you build in the refining capacity. So, you know, now I don't include this in this presentation, but if you were to look at the Chinese capital intensity, it would be substantially less than this. But let's recall, you know, these Chinese companies are not publicly traded companies. They're announcing capital costs that are difficult to interpret, right? So, you know, how much subsidy is involved in the costs that they're producing? You know, I would question whether they're really that much more clever than we are. I'm sure it is true that they are able to build these more efficiently, but I think you would see that there are standard differences, environmental differences, safety differences, labor standard differences. So it's very difficult to compete in the growth market of the nickel against what is China is doing. So just on this theme, this just came out the other day. I think it just illustrates my narrative perfectly, right? So I'll spend a little bit of time on this if you don't mind. How do I minimize this? So up here, Paul Robinson, he's been doing this base metal supply demand stuff at CRU for a really long time. He's moved up to director now. You know, nickel mine supply is becoming significantly more concentrated, and most new Indonesian capacity is guaranteed Chinese offtake, right? So when you hear about this supply response from Indonesia, this is all Chinese controlled nickel, right? China is financing that, they're building it, and they take the nickel back into China. There's a particular challenge for the US and EU how to get hold of nickel units that are produced. By 2025, we expect 48% of the world's supply to come from Indonesia. These new Indonesian facilities are being financed by Chinese investors, and as a consequence, the nickel production will remain concentrated in China, right? So if you're an OEM, if you're a car maker, right, and you're looking for nickel, right, the nickel that's produced today already has customers, right? So you're looking for growth in nickel, it's all in Indonesia, it's all Chinese controlled. This graph here shows this perfectly, right? So what this is change in nickel mine output. Okay, so this is in the past, right? So we have a decrease in North America, the Philippines, and in Central and South America, substantial growth in Indonesia, and then small little slivers of growth elsewhere. 2020 to 2025, exact same thing, right? Little slivers of growth, but it's all in Indonesia. And this is the mine supply growth, right? So, you know, I have another idea for a slide that I couldn't quite get my thoughts together on this today, but really, when you look at Sudbury is a sulfide supply, and the sulfides, of course, go to sulfide processing, the Copper Cliff smelter, the Falconbridge smelter, and then into the refining capacity after that, right? So this does not mean that we don't need, you know, that there are not great mining projects out there in Ontario or in Sudbury, right? In fact, there are, and we need those projects. We need those to fill those smelting capacity, right? But once that capacity is filled, it's going to be very difficult to justify growth in that sulfide capacity. So you're sort of capped at the amount that Canada can produce at those Sudbury smelters and Vale Newfoundland, right? Like once those are full, it's hard to see somebody going to spend another $5 billion on another Vale Newfoundland when they can sell the concentrate to China for 70, 80% of LME value. The math just won't work. You know, unless you know, Canada takes an Indonesian sort of stance and says, well, you're not allowed to export ore. Hard to see them doing that. Even then, you would need kind of project size resources. So, you know, the nickel supply growth is going to come exclusively from Indonesia in Chinese controlled operations. This is where they all are. Here's a map of all the Chinese operations that they built. They're building some HPALs as well. They've run into some problems. They were going to do deep sea tailings on the HPAL residue. And these residues are a bit nasty from the HPALs as well, right? They have chrome-6 in them and things like that. Indonesia has announced that they are not going to permit that, which I think is great. And so they're having to sort of shift that into dry stack tailings and stuff like that. Maybe that'll be well done, and maybe it won't, right? But just phenomenal, you know. And this is the kind of growth that they've seen. So Indonesia went from, you know, here's PT Valley, Indonesia, and Antam is this kind of brown down here. And this was the gray is the ore exports. So they were huge in the ore exports up till 2013. And then Indonesia instituted the ore export ban. They said you can't export anymore. You have to process here. And they were like, no problem. And they built like 1 million tons of capacity in, what's that, 5-6 years, right? So that 1 million tons of capacity took Inco and Falconbridge 100 years to build, right? So the ore in Indonesia is a map of Indonesia, right? You have Jakarta here, Bali is here, Sulawesi's here, and this is where all the nickel is in these circles here, as you can see in the sort of sub-map. There's a guy named Alfred Wallace, was a contemporary of Charles Darwin in developing the theory of evolution. They sort of developed at the same time. Darwin kind of became famous for it, and Wallace is, although well known, kind of less so. And Darwin went to the Galapagos to do his work, but Wallace went to Sulawesi and the Moluccas to do his, right? And what he found was that he developed this thing called the Wallace line that kind of comes in through here, that separates kind of Asia from Australia, right? So in Asia, you have all the Asian animals, orangutans, tigers, elephants, other Asian stuff. And then in the Australia, you have all the marsupials and things like that, right? But in Sulawesi and the Moluccas, the line goes actually around them because it's a completely unique ecosystem on the planet Earth, right? So it's neither many of the species are endemic, right? It's neither the Asian species nor the Australian species. So they call this Wallacea. And so I've overlaid the Wallacea with where the nickel is, right? And so this is one of the unique places. This is one of the most unique ecosystems on the planet Earth, right? Like all of the species are endemic, or many of them. That includes like the birds, the fish, et cetera, right? Insects, presumably not well studied, right? Nobody knows about this, right? So here's an example of some of the animals that are in Sulawesi, right? And these are kind of the cute pictures that you see. I saw all of these animals. I did not see this guy. I did not see that guy, but I saw all these guys. They're not common, but you do sort of see them around once in a while if you live there for a while, you know. And there's also, you know, animals that are not so pretty, and plant species that are completely unique as well. And again, not well studied, right? Like it's too remote. It's so off the beaten path that it's uncool to kind of go there, right? There's no tourists there. Nobody knows about it. So, you know, no very few, if any, kind of academic studies on this very unique place. And so ore exports started in about 2009, which coincides to the time I was there as well. And this is kind of a photo of the mining that happens, or was happening at that time, continues to happen today. And what you see is that there is no control of the runoff. The overburden is just stripped. You know, there's no infrastructure. There's no community development, right? And there's no reforestation. You know, Vale does a fantastic job reforesting their mining and controlling the runoff and operating the mines in a responsible way. But these other operations do not. And I mean, there's endless photos of this, endless. So the barges would come in, right? The barges would come in, they just park at the shore, right? They would, you know, and the extent of the locals' involvement is that, you know, somebody will finance them for some trucks and stuff like that, and they'll sell the ore basically for the cost of digging it up plus a small profit. Now this has changed a little bit now with them building the processing capacity, but this is a river. I've been to this river myself. It's in central Sulawesi near a place called Bahodopi. And this is in July 2017, facing upriver, downriver. And this is in 2007 and 2012, right? So it's quite devastating. And then I got, let's focus on this here. This is Morowali, and then there's a little town called Bahodopi within that. So in 2001, it was pristine jungle. No, but you know, there is some sustenance kind of fishermen kind of living on the coast and stuff. One of the most undeveloped places on earth, I would say. And then in 2011, the miners came and you can kind of see it. And so here you can kind of barely see that. I think it's a different river, but you kind of get the idea than those other. I think that other river's over here somewhere. But so you can see the river here, right? Basically destroyed with runoff and stuff. This is 2016, right? And then if you looked at this today, I think the plant, you know, the big Sichuan plant, I think is in this area or something. But you know, it's at a macro level, right? This is not a little isolated thing to grab the nickel. So that's where we come in, right? So just to summarize so far, the world is going to need a tremendous amount of nickel to put into car batteries and other applications. The only growth opportunity within the sort of macro environment we have today, with projected nickel prices at $6-8, and the sort of cost it takes to build these plants, is the Chinese doing this in Sulawesi using the mining methods that I've shown you here. So we have a different plan, and that's to get the nickel and cobalt from the surface of the seafloor, right? And one of the big advantages of that is once it kind of comes up from the surface of the seafloor, we can really have complete flexibility on where we can process these. You know, there is obviously some cost with logistics, but what we want to do is go to where there's existing hydroelectric power, an existing kind of industrial site, other infrastructure, and to sort of a community that's able and wants to support us. So look, the resource is huge and is not really in serious question, right? So that's, you know, a lot of times people see DeepGreen as a bit of a junior mining company, and there are elements of that for sure, right? But the significant difference is that the resource is not in serious question, and it is very, very big, right? So this is where it is, the Clarion-Clipperton Zone here. Hawaii is here, obviously Mexico here. This is about 1,000 nautical miles from the coast of Mexico. Our base of operations is in San Diego, California. And this is the sort of, I think this is for the whole CCZ, right? Which we are one of 16 contractors here. So the resource is very big, you know, gives you an idea. The grade is great, right? Like 1.4 nickel, 1.1 copper, 0.1 cobalt, and then 30+% manganese. So the nodules sit just on the surface of the seafloor, so there's no need for drilling or blasting. You just kind of hoover them off, suck them out of the mud. Interestingly, they don't exist like below the surface, right? So you would kind of think that, oh, there'd be like a layer that goes, meters and meters down. It's not the case for reasons that I don't understand, and I don't think anybody understands. They sit only on the surface of the seafloor. The grades are good. Even 1.1 copper is a great grade today. I think the average grade is well south of 1% that we get copper from. We're very lucky. There's no significant amounts, trace amounts of arsenic and mercury and cadmium in the nodules. They're very homogeneous in terms of their chemical composition, so there's very little variability. So you can sort of think about, that's the way they form, so slowly over time, all in the same environment. So that kind of makes sense. We show them like this, right? The big nodule thing they could hold in your hand kind of thing, right? But most of them are just gravel. Most of them look like gravel. They don't look as interesting as that. So just picture like a gravel driveway that goes on for hundreds of thousands of kilometers, right? That's what you're dealing with. It's beautiful stuff to handle in terms of our processing as well. So obviously, when you talk about deep sea mining, it becomes a bit of an emotive issue. On the surface of it, I mean, I experience this even with my friends and family, right? When you sort of talk about sort of extracting resources from the ocean, people sort of have a negative inclination to that. But we've done significant research on this to kind of compare the impact of the deep sea mining versus sort of getting this from on land. And it's better in almost every category, except for impact on the seafloor. You can see there's a resource use, less water, less land, less ore because there's no waste rock or overburden. It's less CO2. Less processing waste. I'll get into this. And then impact on society. No one lives out there, so you're not really impacting them in the same way. And then the biomass and the megafauna and the biodiversity. Not sure what that means. So this is more in the resource. It's a lot of tons. We have about 1.6 billion tons of resource at 1.4 nickel now in our recent upgraded 43101, 30% manganese. So the resource is very big, right? And we have, this is up here you see the map, Mexico, Hawaii, Clarion-Clipperton Zone. So we are the yellow, we're the red, and we're the blue or whatever color that is, and the white represents other contract holders. So most of the other contract holders are sovereign states. Russia has one. China has three. Right? So they're starting to get into this. Japan, Korea, each have one. Germany has one. There's only one other kind of commercial, and most of these state actors, they sort of treat them kind of like research projects a bit, right? So none of them are kind of very serious about commercially running this like a project, except there is one. The Belgians are serious, and Lockheed Martin also has one, and they do a bit of stuff, but they're quite a bit behind us. So we do have one competitor who's kind of racing to kind of get this going, and that is GSR from Belgium. So how is this regulated? Right out in the middle of the ocean. It's not like the ministry in Ontario here. So the nodules were found actually in the 1890s by the British, who outfitted an old military ship, the HMS Challenger, and they sort of tasked these guys with going around the world and dredging the seas, and they kind of came back with these in the 1890s. So it was pretty well, it's been known about for a really long time. It's not like it was just discovered or anything. And then in the 1970s, there were 4 different consortia who put about the equivalent of $1 billion of today's dollars into developing this. So they did all the exploration work for us, or a lot of it. And a lot of the technology development too is in the 1970s. And so the consortium included companies like Inco, who I think were in with US Steel, and a lot of these companies have disappeared now or become other companies. Kennecott had one. Lockheed Martin was involved back then as well. And it was going along pretty well. The 70s, nickel price was doing, growing very rapidly. Nickel was growing very rapidly, and but what happened was Lockheed came out and they said, yeah, I think we're going to do this. And the sort of global community said, there's no regulations, man. You can't do that. So that sort of led so these polymetallic nodules sort of led directly into the negotiation and ratification of the International Law of the Sea, which you probably know in terms of the 12-mile economic limit and the 200-mile limit and things like that. So we're regulated under this kind of international law of the sea. And, this is kind of the timeline. I'm going to go through this kind of quickly. Right. So here's all the economic zones and stuff. So this put in place. So it's under the international law of the sea. The regulator is the International Seabed Authority, located in Kingston, Jamaica. And so now there's a process in order to sort of get the license for exploration, and the regulations for they call it exploitation, terrible word, but that's the word they use. So the exploitation regulations are in final draft form, and we're sort of expecting those. They were supposed to be in July of this year or of last year, but COVID sort of has delayed that substantial, into this year anyway. This is the International Seabed Authority. You see, it just looks like the UN, right? All the signatories to the UNCLOS, they call it, the International Law of the Sea, gather here to sort of run the International Seabed Authority and contribute and stuff. And there's words in there, to the ISA will receive significant royalties from any of the projects and their tasks with employing these resources to the benefit of humankind everywhere. It's all on the up and up, I think, because this is what this says, right? So maybe what's not said here is, private companies are unable to sort of get access to the resource, right? So what you have to do is partner with a sponsoring state. Only sovereign states have access to the resource, right? So we've partnered with 3 sovereign states in order to get access to the ground. That's Nauru, Tonga, and Kiribati, which are all kind of Pacific nations that are that will benefit as well, right, through royalties and things like that. And they're great partners for us. Environment. I'm running a bit out of time here, so I'll really get going here. So ours is at the very bottom, right? Like the some of the NGOs who dislike the idea of this kind of try to be misleading, and so they'll sort of put a photo of our boat next to kind of a picture of coral reefs and some machine on the coral reefs or something like that, right? Now the coral reefs are up here, we're down here. It's like basically a sea desert. It actually is called the Abyss, right? Just like the movie. I watched that movie a while ago. It's pretty good. The Abyss from the 80s, maybe. So we're down 6,000 kilometers. It's like a sea desert down there. There's only a very small amount of the sea life there, way below everything that you would be familiar with. We're doing hundreds. We're out on the boat right now, actually. So the boat, the Maersk launcher, Maersk is our partner. So they'll send the boat out with dozens of scientists, and for about 6 weeks at a time, they'll go out and they'll, you know, do all of the studies that they have to do to sort of baseline this and understand the deep sea. A lot of people say that you know, we know more about the moon than we do about the oceans, and I think there is maybe some truth in that, but that is not the case in the Clarion-Clipperton Zone, because there's been extensive research being done in this area since the 1970s, right? So here's like some of the animals that you can see, and you can see kind of see the scale of it with the penny here. So there's a lot of diversity, and yeah, it's pretty interesting, really, the sort of different animals that they bring up. And but one of the challenges is, like, you know, you can only, you know, you can't go down there, right? So you have to sort of put the box core down there, right, and bring up what you see. And then, like, what if you only see one, right, in the whole sort of campaign or over the whole 10 years? Does that mean there's only one? Like, probably not, right? As my colleague Mike, who runs the environmental section, he said, well, if you dropped like 1,000 box cores on Australia, what are the chances you'd get a kangaroo, right? So this is how they do the exploration, right? So how do you define a resource of this nature? And I guess we're very lucky. It's a two-dimensional resource. So what they do is they take the Maersk launcher out, and they do these box cores that you can see down here. So this is like 75 centimeters by 75 centimeters, goes down right into the bottom, right? Bottom closes, brings it up. So what you see here is actually representative of what was on the seafloor. You pick out all the nodules, and you know the nodules per meter squared, right? So the kilograms per meter squared is called the abundance. So there's two key factors, abundance and grade, right? So you know the abundance by doing this, and then you know the grade by assaying those. And then they have this little robot thing here, and it goes along the seafloor. And so they take the box cores and they space them. The GPS on this boat's amazing. It knows where it is, like plus or minus 10 centimeters or something like that, right? And then it takes the images, and so you have the box core, you have the images, you get some AI stuff, and you can sort of correlate everything, and that's kind of how the resource is done. How do you do the collection? So this is stuff, photos from the 70s, right? So sort of take what they brought up thousands and thousands of tons in the 70s, all these consortia. There's also a great story on raising a Russian submarine, but I don't have time for that. So this is kind of what it looks like to scale, right? You have the collector robots down here. They sort of hoover up the nodules. It comes up the riser. So this is like 4 kilometers up the riser, right? The way they lift it is they pump air in, maybe to about this area here. So that provides enough sort of draft up. Then it's a bit of a fleet, right? It's not just one vessel, and then so you fill up the bulk carrier. It goes off to the process plant. Another bulk carrier comes in. You know, we've got some pretty cool photos of what these things look like, or photos, artist representations of what these things will look like. Trying to make it non-threatening. You know, this is like a maintenance bay. Right, and then you can see this is like the ESG impacts of getting the metals from land. Remember, there's 4 metals, right? Just not nickel, and then the impacts are significantly less. I like how this is kind of like one of the things you see on a side of a food box. Processing. This is my area. I'm the onshore guy, so I sort of take over when the nodules are on the transport boat. Right, so my scope includes developing a metallurgical process for this, and all the project development that's associated with that, like what's the infrastructure requirements, you know, the engineering associated with it, cost estimates, stuff like that. Here's our products, bit of the marketing at the moment. Here's our products. We'll make a nickel sulfate, cobalt sulfate, which go into batteries, copper cathode, standard product, and a manganese silicate. So the manganese silicate is analogous to a manganese ore, but it's already been pre-reduced. It's MnO, not MnO2, and has very good impurities as well. So that goes to make silicon manganese, which is a steel industry product. Here's kind of an aspirational kind of view of what we want the process plant to look like. So our vision is to sort of take kind of a port area that maybe has been neglected and embrace the environment of you know, the community into the plant a little bit. Here's our flow sheet, right? So if you're familiar with nickel laterite processing, you'll be pretty familiar with these first two steps: rotary kiln calcining and electric furnace smelting, and then Pierce Smith converters, just like we have at Copper Cliff and the Falconbridge smelter. The only difference is we add some sulfur here. This was done at Société Le Nickel in New Caledonia for a long time, and the only reason, you know, like dozens of years. So that technology exists. Tsingshan just announced that they're going to start doing this in Indonesia. So I was a little bit worried about, you know, this technology, and that, you know, it was really stopped about 10 years ago, and it might be hard to find somebody who knows the details. But by the time we're doing this, the Chinese will be all over it, so it shouldn't be too bad, right? So the great thing about this flow sheet is the manganese, which is the big volume, comes off early, right? So you lose 90% of the volume comes off from the furnace, right? Then that goes off to market, and then you're just dealing with relatively small volumes. Relatively small volumes is still huge, right? But so the alloy comes here, copper, nickel, cobalt alloy. We sulfidize that, convert it to get the iron down, and then it goes into a conventional hydrometallurgical refinery to produce the sulfates. This is really the first zero waste project that I am aware of, and the reason we're able to achieve that is because there's no mine waste, right? The nodules sit on the seafloor, so there's no overburden mine waste or anything like that. The nodules have low levels of harmful elements. So that means we can take our converter slag, which is really an iron silicate product, and use it in aggregate. We're going to be located kind of in an urban environment, so the market should be there for that aggregate. There's a couple of residues that are maybe a little bit difficult to, you know, really can't be sold or useful. So we just take those back to the smelter. They're relatively low volume. And then the other thing we've done in the refinery is sort of made reagent choices that lead to the production of products instead of waste. This is sub-economic, frankly, right? So the reagents are more expensive than the product you're selling, but does eliminate some nasty residues that wouldn't have a home otherwise. The economics of the project, really, it's driven by the grade and the byproduct credits, right? So the byproduct credits on a nickel basis will be producing nickel at negative $2.4 a pound, you know, given lots of different assumptions in that. But you know, because of the copper, manganese, cobalt, you know, and those byproduct credits, you know, the economics are sort of driven by that, and the grades are good, and the volume's there. And so, you know, so we're going to do, in 2019, we did small scale stuff at Kingston Process Metallurgy and in Sudbury as well at XPS. We completed a pilot plant in FLS Smith in the calcining part, and we're just mobilizing now to do the smelting pilot at XPS, right in Sudbury, Ontario. And then we're going to go to sort of what we call Project Zero, which is kind of small scale production using existing Chinese RKEFs to sort of prove the process, get a bit of cash flow, and then we go big into our project. Just a bit of a plug for my friends at XPS. I threw this in at the last minute. So this is the pilot facility we're using in Sudbury. So we have great partners up there. They're doing a great job for us. And here's our development plan, pretty standard mining kind of development, exploration, PEA. We're in a pre-feasibility stage of maturity now. And then, you know, we're looking at starting production in 2024. So in summary, as I outlined at the beginning, you know, a substantial increase in nickel demand. Very difficult to find new supply ex-China, given the variety of situations. And these nodules represent an ethical Western supply solution with very low comparative impact. And I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
Great, thanks, Jeff. So if anyone does have questions, throw them in the chat. I'd be happy to pass them on. So we got one here from Arthur. Can you talk a bit about your company IPO?
Okay, so it was recently announced. There's a they call them a special purpose acquisition, special purpose acquisition company in the United States. So the way that works is they're a company that people invest money in, and they're mandated to go find a partner, right? So this company had approximately $300 million in it. The company's name was Sustainable Opportunities Acquisition Corporation, SOAC is the ticker symbol. So they identified DeepGreen as a company they would like to partner with. And what they, the narrative that they sort of explained to me when I talked to them was that, you know, they talked to all kinds of EV companies and battery technology companies and stuff like that, but they didn't really want to be reliant on, but you're kind of placing all your chips on some technology that may or may not kind of emerge as the big new thing, right? And so when they saw us and they saw that the environmental impacts, and of course they do tremendous amount of due diligence on that, and they saw the resource and they saw the actual impact that this could have, that's when they sort of entered into detailed discussions. And so the first step of that is the sort of discussions. The second step is they have, and then they go out to what's called a pipe. They raised an additional $300 million in the pipe. So now it's a company with $600 million in cash. And now we're just going through all the regulatory stuff with the SEC and filing all the documents. And we're hoping to be a public listing in May or June. So yeah, and then we'll have the money to do this. We'll have the money to go right into production.
Very interesting. And tentatively, where will you be processing?
That's a great question. So we sort of have two parallel pathways for that. I'm just going to close my screen. How do I do that? Oh, there you are. Now I can see you. So we sort of have two parallel pathways with that. One is kind of a technical pathway that I'm sort of leading, right? And so that's kind of saying like, okay, like first of all, we've benchmarked where all the locations with the cheap power are, right? Cheap power is the driver. We use we need you know, three 90 megawatt furnaces, right? And we don't want to be generating CO2 through coal power plants and stuff. So first off, you're going to kind of have a limited number of places in the world that have that kind of capability, right? So we have identified a number of places with that capability, with the hydroelectric capacity, and it has to be cheap as well, right, to make the economics work. So that is Malaysia in the province of Sarawak, Tasmania, Australia, Quebec, Canada, a few of the southern states, although the green credentials are a little shaky there, Norway, and there's one other one. Iceland came up, right, but a bit of a lack of infrastructure there. Very cheap. Iceland has the cheapest power in the world. And there's a sixth one that I can't remember off the top of my head, right? Okay, so that was kind of a benchmarking, right? So what do we need? We need cheap power. We need natural gas for the kilns. And then you overlay that with kind of the normal sort of business rankings, right? Like Venezuela, ooh, bad, right? And Canada, oh, good, right? So you sort of a typical kind of ranking of these countries friendly to these kinds of industries. And those are kind of the 5 or 6 leading indicators for that. So now what we're doing is going to the next level of detail, looking at the logistics costs in detail. So we had that before, but now we're going into a bit more detail on the logistics and specific sites within those jurisdictions. So we're looking for somewhere with a port, with the land available near the port, because it's 6 million tons of nodules. You don't want to be moving that too far. And so, yeah, Quebec, Tasmania, Malaysia are the leading ones right now, and the U.S. And then in parallel to that, there's kind of strategic discussions around partnerships, right? You know, the United States and Australia and Canada and Europe are all becoming quite aware of the nickel situation that I've kind of outlined here, and are pretty worried about that the supply. They're all trying to kind of get into this EV. You know, it's all about the cars, right? It's not about the nickel, it's about the cars. But you can't have a car industry if you don't have the nickel. And so the big states are kind of starting to put this together a bit, right? And so governments are sort of pretty interested in sort of helping or finding a pathway. And then the automotive companies themselves are seeking nickel supplies. So some of them are kind of going down further downstream. Tesla in particular has made quite a few public comments on that they're looking for nickel supply. Just to be clear, I'm not sort of linking our company with Tesla or anything, right? I didn't mean to do that, but yeah, no. So yeah, so there could be some situation where there's a partner that sort of wants you to locate in a specific place, right? So it's kind of those two parallel things right now, and we'll have to figure this out by the end of pre-feasibility, which is kind of like a year from now. So it's a tight time frame there.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to offer a follow-up question myself around someone like Tesla, who Elon has sniffed around Sudbury a little bit, and obviously in the headlines in New Caledonia. So it sounds like what you're talking about would have been right up the alley.
Yeah.
But no interest there. No handshake yet.
Just can't say anything. Yeah.
Good. I guess from me, I'm glad I had lots of questions forming around the environmental questions and regulations around how this would work since you're in international waters. How was that process developing relationships with the three island nations in order to get that partnership? Was that you DeepGreen heading to them, or them coming to you when they saw the benefit, and how many other opportunities were there to generate those relationships?
You mean with the sovereign states?
Correct. Yeah.
I mean, it's a bit before my time, so these are kind of historical relationships. I think they want to sort of tie in countries that have been, like Nauru has been very seriously impacted by phosphate mining historically, and is kind of a struggling Pacific nation, also impacted by rising sea levels and things like that. So it just kind of ties in. Kiribati is a Pacific nation that's kind of low lying, and you know, their government has floated ideas such as like building an offshore city and things like that, right? So it's just I think it just kind of tied together with the narrative. But like I say, this was a bit before my time.
Mm.
My colleagues can answer this better.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, I'll be bluntly honest. Until we started getting onto this topic for the CIM, my knowledge of deep green and nodule mining in the Pacific was very minimal. And do you foresee through feasibility, as this gets closer to realization, the mounting questions from the environmental community on the sustainability? Will you, and are you prepared for more attention as this becomes reality, and how you'll defend Deep Green's the project and living up to the expectations that you sort of set out here?
Yeah. Look, most of the resources that the company spends are on the environmental side at the moment, right? So the boat, it's very expensive to send the Maersk launcher out for 8 weeks with 50 scientists on board, right? So that's it's something we're taking very seriously. The environmental studies are done by the top scientists in the world. It's all done on an open basis. All the results are made public. The scientists are not forced to sign anything that says they can't speak freely, if you know what I mean, right? They're free to say their studies are going to say what they say. In terms of, there's already quite a lot of NGO activity if you look carefully. So we have communications department that's highly skilled in sort of handling these, putting our narrative out there. We sort of feel that the opposing narrative is not fair sometimes. I brought up that example of them sort of bringing this up and then showing our picture next to the coral reefs and things like that, right? It's been pretty disingenuous. So we do run into that sort of thing quite a lot. And we try to openly engage all the time too. Like we've invited the NGOs into our sort of environmental sessions and things, and they decline to attend. But that's what we're looking for, is open conversation and how to sort of solve these things. And the other thing I think I would point out is that it's kind of, and presumably everybody here works in the mining industry, right? And let's face it, a lot of people in society don't like mining, but they like driving in their car and they like steel buildings, and everybody likes metals, but no one likes mining, right? So you have to get these materials from somewhere, and our view is that this is the least impactful way to do it. And so that's kind of the narrative we're pushing, and the data behind that is supportive of our narrative. But that question, it's a very important question, right? But the other thing about the ISA, the International Seabed Authority, is that the intention to do this is built into the international law of the sea, right? The decision was made in 1984 or whatever it was, right, when everybody signed this. Now it's just the details of how it's done.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. So that brings me to a question: how often would this international regulator be updating regulations that would govern your work, and is that a risk to the project?
The regulations aren't finalized yet, so that is of course a risk until they are finalized. How often they're updated, I'm sorry, I'm unable to answer that because I just don't know. Mm-hmm. I'm sure I can't say. Are there mechanisms in place? I don't know.
Good. Thanks, Jeff. Another question from the chat room. How do you manage boundaries on the seafloor with other potential resource companies when you can't necessarily see them?
So the like I mentioned before, the Maersk launcher can position itself within plus or minus 10 centimeters, even in 6-foot waves, which I find to be quite astonishing. Like this Maersk launcher, when you go on the deck of it, I haven't been out to the sea, but I've been on the ship like when it's in port, right? And it's like being on a spaceship, you know. Like they have the captain's chairs with levers and computer screens everywhere. Like this is a high tech operation, this Maersk launcher. So how do you, I guess that's one thing, right? Like you sort of have the GPS of the operations and stuff, but the other thing is that the seafloors, our concessions are 75,000 kilometers each, right? So 75,000 kilometers squared times 3. So, I don't know the details of how that's done, but just with GPS and stuff, and how could you protect someone from going and scooping up your nodules? Like I think, the barrier to entry there is the technology and the capital involved, right? And if you're speaking of, are the Chinese going to come and mine our area? Well, you're into the realm of global geopolitical conflict at that point, really.
Okay. I don't see any more questions coming through the chat room. We'll leave it a couple more seconds, but Jeff, very interesting. Looking forward to following this a little more closely than I have in the past. Certainly an interesting topic, and certainly might give us a bit of a concern in Sudbury that there's something else on the market besides gold sulfide mining in Sudbury. But on behalf of the
no way, you guys have to invest in the mines too. There's not enough. There's not enough nickel. So get on it, man.
Yeah, I'm asking the same questions as well. Yeah. But yeah, really want to offer a big thank you on behalf of the CIM Sudbury and our membership for taking the time in your busy schedule. I can't imagine the amount of work going into this. Was of great value to us to see something different, and we'll be posting this recorded video on our YouTube channel for other people to see and view in the future. And yeah, again, on behalf of the Sudbury chapter, myself and Neil and the rest of the executive membership, really appreciate you taking time out of your day, and I wish you all the best, and can't wait to read more headlines and what's going to happen with DeepGreen's initiative in the Pacific Ocean.
Right on. Thanks, guys. I'll be at the pilot plant at XPS sometime in April. If anyone wants to meet up for a beverage, let me know. I'll be happy to.
I think there's a communal hope that the beverage joints will be open in April when you come to visit.
I hope so. I hope so.
Okay, a couple thank yous from the audience. So really, again, thanks very much. And yeah, I see Mark's already hitting the Smithix. Good.
Okay.
The same thing. All right. Thanks again.